What's up, friends? I hope you guys are as excited as I am about the future and possibilities of community in central Pennsylvania. So I said I was going to try to get some content out there. I asked who wanted to chat with me. Some people said yes. And today I built up the courage and I went and had my first conversation with my good buddy, Adam Geesaman. Check it out. I'm going to just talk. And then my first question is to give some of your background, and then we'll go from there.
My background.
Where'd you get started? Where'd you go to school? Give me some of your history. Give me what you would put on your resume that is relevant. Or not. I don't care.
It can be a long story. So I'll try and keep it brief. But I went to school in Ohio, to Malone University, with the intention. They had a program called Commercial Music Technology, which I honestly did not know really enough information about what it was and what it wasn't. My thought was I would learn how to run sound, basically. But it was more about writing jingles for commercials and things like that. It was a lot more music and a lot less of the technology piece. So we had a lot of music theory classes and piano class and stuff like that, which was fine. But it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. And then there was one of the professors there was a professional musician. He was a guitar player and he was a producer, and he produced a lot of CCM albums at the time that I had really loved, bands that I knew and respected well. And so I was like, I want to do what this guy does. But he actually was a professor there, but didn't have a college degree and was just full of experience.
So he was like an adjunct.
No, he was a full-time professor, but he had multiple gold albums, platinum albums. He clearly knew
the
his
honorary
stuff.
degree.
And so
he would be doctorate.
Yeah, he would be in, I'll call them heated conversations with the traditional music department who oversaw the commercial music technology program, and just kind of said, this is what these people need to learn if this is what they want to do. And then the traditional music program was like, no, they need this. And he basically was like, look, this is what I do. This is what they need. And they kind of parted ways. And I felt about 2 years in, I was just like, if this guy's saying this isn't what I need and I want to do what he does, I'm not going to spend 2 more years here and tens of thousands of dollars.
Sure.
And so I stopped. I didn't get my degree. And started, I stayed in Ohio. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, Lebanon County, but I had stayed in Ohio for whatever reason. Looking back, it was God. But at the time, I was like, I'm just going to stay here. This is where my friends are. And I started working on a maintenance team at a church. And there was a guy there that was a volunteer, maybe part-time sound guy at the church. And he asked knew I was interested in audio and running sound and stuff. So asked if I wanted to be a part of things there. And I started doing a college and career service that they were doing pretty regularly. And I remember to this day, the guy put his arm around me after he saw me run the first time. And he said, dude, he's like, you can do this. He's like, I'm going to teach you how to do this. And I was like, great. Who are you? I didn't, I was like, what? I had no idea who this guy was really, or,
thank you for the
but I was like, this is great. And he's like, I need you to come over to my house. And he's like, you're going to do some work for me and I'm going to teach you how to do it. And I'm like, this is real weird, but I basically clean toilets and stuff at the church. So if this guy's willing to teach me something, I'll see what he has to say. So the following week, I remember going over to his house, go down into his basement. And I know this is getting weird, but this is how I was feeling. I'm going, okay, open the door, gold record for Kansas hanging on the wall, and many other things. But he was a songwriter. And he was a guitar player and wrote songs for Kansas, Vince Gill, Aretha Franklin, not just oh, I write songs in my basement. I'm a songwriter,
right. Legit songwriter.
And he had a studio down there where he would record his demos for things. And his buddies, who was people that played drums for the Eagles, and like, his friends were musicians, as well.
Sure.
And so like these are legit musicians. So anyway, I would go down and figure out, well, I would sell stuff on eBay for him because he was old school and was like, I don't know how to use computers, but I have stuff I need to sell. So I would sell his used equipment for him. I would fill out paperwork for copyright information that he didn't want to do. I would, whatever he needed basically. And then he would sit me down, and it was one of those Mackie 24 track recorders. And this, I forget what the console was analog console. And he would just hit play and he'd be like, go ahead and mix this song, that he had just recorded with his buddies. So like it was tracked well, you
Right.
know? And I would mix it. He'd go upstairs and like get coffee and then come back down in 20 minutes, and he'd listen to me like, nope, that's not right. Start over. And like, and coaching me along the way,
sure.
and do some ear training, you'd graphic EQ, and he'd run some pink noise through and be like, what frequency is this? And like, so he would teach me all that stuff, and he would teach me how to mix. And that's where I learned what instruments were actually supposed to sound like. And, it's come a long way to affect the way that I mix now, to where most of my mixing is done by coaching people on stage to get their instruments to sound the way that I know they should sound like. And so when you look at, I think, my mixes, and if you you can kind of see, like, I try my best to not do anything in the console. Like if I can get my job done before it gets into the microphone, the console then is for color and for fun and for creating impact in the room and those types of things. I really, really, really try hard to not have to fix anything in the soundboard. And so that comes from that mentorship of
Right. Because
record it
people in
right.
the studio don't manufacture tones unless they're intentionally like adding samples or anything like that, or changing the sound to be something completely different. They don't do that. The sound comes to them phenomenal. Like, oh, those drums aren't tuned, and why did you track them? You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's harder in church to play that game, because it's like, man, I got a million things to do. Where do I find the time to focus on tuning my drums? And so like one of the things that I love to do was like to find people that I could connect with on the worship team that were passionate about it. And like, if I had to show you how to tune the drums, and then, so like I found my good buddy Kyle, and he's like amazing. He actually went to Hillsong, and he was one of the people that they had tuning drums at Hillsong in Australia. So I was like, you're my drum tech now forever. And I'm done being a drum tech.
Right. But yeah, did that for a while, and then ended up actually getting a full-time job with that church that I was at, as their tech director. That was my first tech director role. And they were just getting into multi-site. And this was like early 2000s. So the only real example I think that we had at the time was like Seacoast, who was just starting multi-site stuff as well. And so we were doing multi-site with VHS tapes, and we'd record on a Saturday night onto like 5 different VCRs, and then hand tapes to pastors, and then they'd drive to their locations on a Sunday morning. And my responsibility was to create systems for them to function in multi-site. And so I've been doing multi-site for a lot of years through a lot of different technology changes.
That nugget right there makes me feel like such of a tool, because in our friendship, I feel like I've always monopolized the conversation, and something that I'm like pressing to learn is how to listen better. And I just learned something that I never knew. Like, you're one of the original multi-siters.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, let's just say it, like VHS tape. And so you have this wealth of knowledge, and that's why we're here having this conversation. But continue.
yeah. But yeah, I did that for a number of years, and then left that job. I was still very young at that point. I was in my early 20s. And I think probably just had some relational issues with other people on staff, that really I should have worked out, but I was too young to really be emotionally wise to that. And I didn't have anybody around me to coach me through those things. So I ended up quitting out of frustration, on my own part. And I really, looking back, it really probably wasn't anything to do with the church in particular. It was just me being young and dumb. And, but I left, and then I had gotten a job with an integrator they were installing a system into a local church. This is still in Ohio. And they just needed some help. They were from California, and they were like, hey, like, we've got 3 months of work or 6 months. I don't remember how long it was. And I was like, sure, I need a job, and this is great. And it turns out that that company, the owner, worked for Disney, and he designed and integrated, at least up until that point, all of the Disney worlds all over the world. Like, that was their deal. And so the guys, there was 3 guys that they sent out. And the one guy was one of the first 7 people that they hired in the Disneyland in California, and was there when, like, the ETC, the 2 brothers that started ETC, they used to work for Disney as well. And
I feel
so,
like we need to get Kevin Kimmel in on this conversation from Yamaha, because he worked at Disney for God knows how many years, and like he's got to know some of these people. But yeah, that's another conversation for another day.
So yeah, one of the guys was from the Disney in California, and he was there when, like, they invented ETC, and you know, when MIDI was created, and like all of this kinds of crazy stuff. So he's teaching me how to do install stuff. And then one of the other guys that they sent was from Disney in Florida, and his job was running, previous to working for this integrator, his job was to run sound in all of the ballrooms at the Disney hotels. And so he would be running sound for like Billy Joel and, like, you know, whoever Disney brought in to do entertainment for the parks. Like, he would just do all of that.
Yeah, we were just down at Disney Springs in April, and I'm like, man, like what they do on the production there in Universal, like the guy who was at Worship Center before me worked for Universal and was one of their audio people, and I couldn't understand like what that really meant. And like, so I have another friend that used to be work for Peloton, and I didn't understand what that meant, but they produce so much content that they need audio people for these workout things that they're that are part of their subscription to getting the bikes and everything like that. And Apple, why did Apple need audio people? And you find out why. It's bananas, dude. Like, oh, you'd only do one keynote a week, and you learn so much more once you get behind the scenes.
Right. So I say all this to say, like, you know, between my original professor, who was industry professional, the guy that helped me learn in the studio, and now these guys, like, I did not choose or go after any of those opportunities. But again, looking back, like, it was just the Holy Spirit and just the Lord, like, guiding and directing my path and putting me in the right place at the right time, because I literally could not have paid to have that education. And even to go up to people like that and be like, hey, I'd like you to be my mentor. Would you teach me? Like, you can't just walk up and find those people. like, and you may get an opportunity with one of those over your lifetime. I think it's not very often that you get to rub shoulders with that many people, especially for somebody who's from central Pennsylvania. And, you know, like, it's just this wild thing where I'm in another state, and just these people are being put in my path. And so I've really had a lot of opportunity to learn from what I would say are the best of the best. Like, they just, you know, very deep knowledge of how all this stuff works. But anyway, after that, I mean, I was only like 24 at this point. So like, all of this stuff happened when I was like real young. Right. And then, I ended up moving back home. A lot of my roommates and friends from Ohio were graduating college at that point. They had stayed and graduated, and then they were moving down to Nashville. Many of them, either working for bands and doing tours, or being in bands and playing. And I was like, oh, I'd really like to move to Nashville, but I'm the type of person where I don't just jump without looking very easily. So like, they're moving down there, and I'm like, I want to move down there, but I need to find a job first. So I'm like calling people looking for a job, so that I know, well, if I move, I have something to do. And everybody's answer was, well, just come down and then we'll figure it out. And I'm like,
that's really how it works. And most people are afraid to take that
and I'm
jump.
just like, no,
Peter
I need you to give me a job first. Like, I couldn't do it. And so I moved home and moved back to Lebanon, and I had put in an application at Sight and Sound, and it was just a general application. I was like, I'm just going to work there and like push sets around, and save up money, because my goal was still to move down to Nashville. But I was like, I got to have some cash to do it. And so like, I'm just going to do that. And I went through this like crazy long interview process with them, and they found out some of my history of running sound and doing multi-site, whatever. And so they were like, well, we have an opening for an audio operator. Would you want to do that? And I'm like, sure. like I've never run theater stuff before. I really don't know what I'm doing, but I do like audio stuff, and that's what I want to do. So I'll do that. Not realizing what I was signing up for. But at the time, I think I was the youngest person that they had ever hired to run shows there. It was a pretty significant deal for them, I think, just from what I've heard. And I ended up staying there for 6.5 years or so, running front of house for Sight and Sound. During that time, I met my wife there and never moved to Nashville.
And so, in the running sound, you said a word where I know a little bit about Sight and Sound. So there's operators and then there's programmers, right? And so you had to operate the thing that was kind of built, like, so all of the stuff moving around. Explain what.
I think in theater it's pretty common that there's a designer. So they do everything in house. So there was somebody on staff who was the audio designer. They were responsible for what the sound was in the room, like how loud things were, the tonal quality of things. That person in this case also did the editing and mixing. If there was like a DVD release or anything like that, that would all be done in the studio. My job as an operator was literally fader monkey. Like I sat down at the console, and during rehearsals, the audio designer would dictate pretty much his parameters of what the show wanted to be. And then that would also be in conjunction with the director of the show. So as they were directing the cast on stage and trying to get their vision accomplished, he would work with the audio designer, and the two of them would basically decide what was going to happen. And then I was just the person to execute it. So I didn't have a ton of decision-making capabilities when it came to the mix. It was really just, this is what we want you to do. You need to do it. And oh, by the way, you need to do it exactly the same about 350 times or so.
There's a great attention to detail in that.
Yeah. So there was a lot of programming ahead of time. So we would program certain things ahead of time. Like we would do that during rehearsals. So that as we ran the show, those things would execute exactly the same each time. But then there was a lot of manual things. When people are doing dialogue, they're maybe saying a line slightly faster or slightly slower one day, or maybe a little bit louder, a little bit soft. So you're still mixing manually microphones, but there was also a lot of things that were triggered based off of SMPTE
and stuff like that. And
sometimes it would depend. Sometimes in that theater, it's all canned music. So it's tracks. There's no pit orchestra or anything like that. So we would run like 72, I think, channels of audio in track form. And part of that was sound effects and stuff. And some things would be triggered based off of where we were in the music. So it would happen automatically. Other things could be triggered off of dialogue. And so those things we would trigger manually. So it just would kind of depend on the function of that particular sound effect or whatever.
So when you say trigger manually, was there somebody there triggering like a sound effect manually?
There was one operator in the booth, and they would be manually doing microphones and there was one person operating the audio.
Okay.
So
you had to do both.
It was at the time, again, they use some different stuff now. It's been about 10 years since I've been there running, but at the time it was the Meyer Q Station platform. And what now, like part of that is now the Space Map Go thing.
Right.
This was like the precursor to a lot of that. I think we counted during Joseph one year, a normal show would have like, I don't know, maybe 80 or 100 or 120 cues in for like hitting play for like music and stuff like that. And this is over a 2.5 hour period. And then there was...
So like one per minute.
You kind of. But like, and then there was like 900 and something manual fader moves that you would need to do. So the way that we would run the show is you have a line. So you turn that mic up, they would say the line, you turn the mic back down. And so like every line of the show, you're moving a fader twice. Right. And so you're doing that on top of hitting the go button. You'd have a headset on, so you're listening to the stage manager. you'd be dealing with broken things. You know, there's
Interesting.
50 or 60 channels of wireless running around on stage. So there was an audio op backstage that would be basically your troubleshooter. They're like fixing stuff as the show goes on. And then you'd swap back and forth between those two roles. So you didn't run every show. So there was two of us that would run the show. And that's the other thing too, is making things consistent was about, you've got 2 or maybe 3 people, depending, that are all running the same show, and it needs to be the same regardless of who's running it too. You didn't get to add your own flavor to it or whatever. Like, it needed to be the same.
Yeah, that's real consistency.
Yeah. And so a lot of that even tracks into, now that I'm at Victory Church, I've been here for a little over 10 years. A lot of the consistency piece is what comes out of that theater thing, of where we've got to make this the same. Like, I really, you know, part of it's like an ego thing, where it feels good when like somebody comes back and be like, hey, were you mixing today? Like, it sounds really good. And you're like, yeah, like I was mixing, like, thank you for the compliment. And then another piece of me is like, I really hate that you know that it was me mixing, because I want everybody on my team to mix the same. And I want every service to feel just as good as the other services. I want our team to be able to come in and execute excellently, so that when I'm not here, there's no hole, you know, like those types of things.
For sure.
And so like part of it like feels good. And then the other part's like, like my job's not done yet. Like, I need,
on a spiritual level, you don't want to be like, man, look, I've done so well that if I'm not there, you feel the loss. Like, if I'm not like here on the face of the earth anymore, which is like an uncontrollable, but
Right.
like beyond like.
But even if I'm
left
just on
the job.
vacation or something,
Yeah,
like, I
that
want it to be
too,
good.
you know,
like,
but like,
you know,
100%. You know, but there are situations where the ego is like, well, if I'm on vacation, it's going to be a little bit different, but not a lot different. But I mean, like, one of my passions became like, I really don't want it to feel more in a marginal, like 5 to 10% different. And that's what consistency started to look for, like, for me at Worship Center. And I'm just like, man, I just like, so hearing your thought on consistency and the extreme, and I've seen what you've done with the multiple campuses and everything else like that. And you talked about like, we only do this many plugins in our LV1 system and whatnot. And I'm just like processing through as I'm listening, like how this type of thing can help the community that I just pray to God like blossoms in this area, man. And so like, you're my first conversation, and so like let's just to think about it, like, I feel like we've been friends for forever, and I don't remember how we met. Do you?
I want to say it might have been like, you might have hosted a Waves thing over at Worship Center.
So you were at, okay.
I was definitely
wondering if it
there.
was that.
I'm trying to
Okay.
think if that was the first time or not, but that was definitely
'cause I was
real
like
early
4
on.
or 5 months in at Worship Center at that
Okay.
point in time, and I definitely wouldn't have been out there
that
like
was-
wanting to meet anybody before that period.
That was before we purchased our LV1 system here.
A lot of years before LV1 was made. That was like 2015.
Yeah.
Because I started at Worship Center in 2014. So
Okay.
2015, I think, is when.
But that was probably, if we had met before then, we certainly weren't hanging out or doing anything. Like, we might have met or something, but that would have probably been pretty early on.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm grateful, dude, because I honestly, I have to give you the credit for, like, I've been like, I'm a very bubbly personality, but I'm as an individual, I'm introverted. Like, I didn't at one point go out my way to meet people just on a friendship level. I would like sacrifice that fear of rejection and everything else like that to go learn something from somebody. I'm willing to like, man, look, all right, this dude said he don't never want to see my face again, but I was trying to learn from the best of the best. And so I would shoot my shot basically and go and ask. But I feel like I'm pretty sure that like the first time we actually hung out and had breakfast or something like that was all on you. And I'm grateful for that because now I have like a friend, like a legit friend. And so it's been this thing that I've been processing through the past couple of months where it almost looks like a target, but it's like circles of relationship and how close they are basically to the heart. So it's like you have when you go to work, a lot of people will go to work and they'll feel like their associates or their acquaintances at work are best friends because they're in situations where the hang is almost automatic. And then if they leave that job, they feel
proximity.
heartbroken that the proximity is not there anymore, and that relationship gets lost. And they're like, man, but I have all of my community was at my job type of thing. So you have acquaintances, associates, friends, and family. And some people, I'm very huge on people that are like, they've gone from friend to feeling like a brother and family, because I didn't have a really strong family upbringing and everything else like that. So like, dude, thank you, man. Honestly, thank you for that. And again, this being like my first attempt at trying to be a better listener, and also trying to learn how to ask questions thoroughly enough to see the information without like scaling it. Like, oh, let me see if I can ask the right questions to get all of the things that I want you to talk about with waves to come out. No, just keeping it really casual. And it's great because like I said, I already learned something. Like Disney and the gold record guy and everything. Like, what? I'm mind blown. Like, we can stop right now. Like, I mean, I don't want to go too long because it's almost noon and it's been about almost 30 minutes as well already.
Wow.
But on square one, like, it doesn't feel like it though, does
I don't
it?
normally talk this much, so
I talk all the daggone time, and I think everybody knows that about me. But dude, man, that as an intro to share with people, I think is a great foundational point. And like I said, man, there's little pieces that came out of it that I'm like, man, can we get Kevin into it and grow the conversation and see where it goes? And I have some other people that I just want to talk to on a worship level. I think like the next conversation will be with my wife, who's a music teacher and also serves at Worship Center. And another young lady who is a teacher. I don't know what she teaches, but her husband works at Calvary.
Okay.
And so I'm like, all right, that next conversation, like in my head, I'm like, man, I can focus it on learning. And like, how do you as a teacher teach other people? And if you were a worship director, how would you teach other people to basically learn? Like, because there are different styles that my wife has this whole acronym that she knows that I can't remember anymore. But I'm like really curious to see how these conversations pan out with people that like I have music in common with, but maybe not a million other things. And so like my wife's a teacher, and this other young lady who serves and leads worship at Calvary, she's a teacher. And I'm like, what is this conversation going to be like? And I'm excited for that one, and like looking to move forward and see what other conversations are happening. And I really want it to be at least foundationally people who are Central Pennsylvania. Because, I got access to a ton of people.
Sure.
But it's like, oh, man, I can't listen to Pooch because Pooch is out there mixing Iron Maiden and Jay-Z and Justin Bieber and all of that.
Somewhat unrelatable.
It's a pay scale that's way above my head, but it's really not. And I think that's where people struggle at. But you have an extreme amount of talent, but people can relate to you more because you're in a church. This church doesn't on surface level seem like it's doing things technology wise grander than like Worship Center was. But I'm sitting in here in this space right now, and I'm like, bruh, people just don't know what's here in this space right here on Greenfield. Like, it's the resources that are here, and we got to break down the islands, man. I'm trying to take an island and like where the world, they say back in the old Mesopotamia, whatever, I just made up a word, where the world was all one piece of land and they broke into islands. I like, man, look, it feels like a force and a tension to push the islands back together, or at least get them close enough to build bridges between them and see where we can go from there. And I'm like, thank you for responding to a simple message that I posted on Instagram and being willing to have a conversation and share a bit about yourself. And we're definitely doing another one of these.
Okay.
And we went there from one question.
Yeah.
amazing. You're such an awesome dude. I really do.
Thanks.
I truly do. Like when you were talking to the people who were here earlier, I truly was looking at you with a sheer amount of admiration. Like,
Thank you.
I felt a little weird because I was looking at you like I loved you. Like I really was. And I had to like check myself for a second. I was like, stop staring at him. It's getting real weird. If he connects eyes with you, it's going to be like how they say with Prince. If you look Prince in the eyes, you're automatically like, I'm every other thing possible under the sun now. Anyways,
funny.
but thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody listening and who watched on the Instagram live. We hope to do some more of these. And if you want to see more from Adam, let's get the conversation started, whatever. I want to hear more from Adam. So let's go.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. If you enjoyed that as much as I did, leave a comment, hit me up. Let's get the conversation rolling. Let's get Central Pennsylvania connected together. And also, if you're interested in doing community with a bunch of like-minded people here in Central Pennsylvania, shoot me a message, hit my email, shoot me a DM, whatever may be the case, and I'll shoot you a link to join the email list so that you can subscribe and I can get the email blast out to you for when we're doing like summer fun events, when we're doing other events throughout the year with food and fellowship and fun. Until then, peace.